We speak reverently when we talk about turns because it's one of those things where you just don't joke about because it's intense. You've gone through this really busy leasing season. There's a lot of stress. And at the end of it, you need to move out hundreds and hundreds of residents to make way for a few days later, hundreds and hundreds of more residents. I had done a lot of hard things before, but being on site was the hardest job I have ever done or probably will ever do. It is demanding on every level, right? Let's say you have a lead that just came in, a parent who's on the phone who's upset, right? And a resident who, just walked in because they have a roommate issue. Which one takes priority? Is it the leasing because we have to hit occupancy in order for this whole thing to work? Is it the parent who's upset right now and wants a resolution? You can't really say, sorry, ma'am, I got to make another phone call. Or do you deal with the person who's right in front of you with the relationships?
Welcome back to Season 4 of Multifamily Unpacked. Jason Terry from Redstone Residential joins us to talk about student housing, centralization, leading with empathy, and his journey from higher education student affairs to student housing operations. Jason sees student housing not just as real estate, but as a critical support system during a coming-of-age chapter. This one's about more than leasing. It's about showing up when it matters most. I hope you enjoy the level of empathy, leadership, and human connection that I felt with Jason throughout this entire conversation. Jason, welcome to the show. We really appreciate making time for us. You were a big hit at Funnels Forum, and so the reward for that is you now have to come on with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. Glad to be with you.
Separately, we introduced you as a leader in student housing, and we have never had a student housing specific guest on before. We had Alex O'Brien, who from Cardinal, can speak to their point of view. They have a lot of beds under management, but certainly for Funnel, Redstone was our first student housing partner. So normally we ask folks, how did you make your way into the world of multifamily? Obviously a flavor of multifamily student housing. But Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
It's been a roundabout journey. My career started in higher ed. I was really active as a student, involved in a bunch of different clubs and a bunch of different organizations, and just kind of had this mindset of, what is it that you actually enjoy? What's going to be your greatest level of contribution? And I was studying accounting at the time, and I had a professor who said one day, hey, if you can't imagine yourself being the very best, in this field, you have to choose another field. And I was like, I'm never going to be the guy that solves the accounting problem or daydreams about it. I would tell accounting jokes in class, no one would laugh. I'd be like, all right, calculator guys, and just dead silent. And I'm like, okay, these aren't my people. But I really enjoyed was student life, and I really enjoyed that coming of age experience. After graduation, I worked as a recruiter, going to high schools, doing the rah-rah, helping students and their families bridge the gap between the high school experience and transitioning into college. After a few years of doing that, I went back east and got my master's in education, in educational leadership, came back to UVU, Utah Valley University, where I was prior, and worked in their student success department for a couple of years. And then I got to a point where those who know higher ed is a very slow moving boat in the sense that they're planners and they plan years and years and years in advance. I just kind of got a little bored waiting for things. I would have these amazing ideas. I had these things that I wanted to do to make a difference, and it was just committee to just talk about things. I thought, hey, well, what else is there? And my wife, actually, she started working at Redstone as a instructional designer, and it kind of occurred to me, wait a second, I can still work with students, but work with them outside of higher ed. I can still help provide that coming of age experience, but in the private sector. So transitioned to student housing, took on a property to just kind of get my feet wet, had a really good year. We leased up, one of two, I think, in our market that leased up. And there was an opening for Redstone to do similar work at what I was doing at UVU. So transitioned over and started our CLO and a couple other projects.
Awesome, yeah. And for those who aren't spending all day, every day like you and I in this fun world of centralization, CLO, Centralized Leasing Office, which is certainly still a relatively new concept broadly in multifamily, but for an organization like yourself, you guys have made a ton of progress. But before we get to today and even the future, let me go back in time. I love that story, how you recognized that you had a passion for students and for that transitional time in life, and now you get to continue to do that. I think it is important for me as an entrepreneur, recognizing the elements of your career journey that you want to hold on to. One, for me, my whole career has been in housing in some form or fashion, either on the builder side, even on the management side, and most of my time on the tech side. Higher ed, leadership, student housing, recruiting. These are themes, Jason, that I already see playing a role in your day-to-day today. I mean, as a leader, and as a technology leader, you're constantly recruiting people to your cause. You literally, work with and oversee large central teams and operations. I'm curious, if you think back to those earlier stages in your career, are there some life lessons that you take from that, whether it's, certain roles in accounting that you did into that you would share with others that are kind of earlier in their career now?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think probably the biggest lesson that's had the largest impact on my life is actually when I was in high school and I got my first job, and it was at a fast food restaurant. And we didn't have a ton of money. I grew up single parent, and I remember my first day, I was about to go to work, and my sister, who's the smartest person on earth, she could take over the world if she wanted to. And she pulled me aside and she said, "Hey, if you don't have anything to do to like at work, you find a broom and you sweep something, right? You get a rag and you clean something. If there's nothing to do, you don't stand around, you find something to do, you find a way to contribute." And, I would do that, and, I would be adding value, and I took that with me to college when I would be interning or doing student life and there wasn't anything to do. Instead of watching cat videos, or instead of, you know what I mean, just kind of dinking around, I would go and I would ask the full-time people or the more advanced people, "Hey, is there anything that you're doing right now that is not worth your time, right? Is there anything that you have on your plate that needs to be done but really isn't worth you giving attention to it?" And so I would get project after project after project. Looking back, it was all trivial things, but my talents and my experience would grow to the point where in many cases I would become the expert in that thing because everyone would delegate it to me. I think that has been really helpful in this role with our centralized leasing office. Is in a lot of ways we're an auxiliary to Redstone. And the idea is, okay, where are people hurting, right? Where is there something that needs to be done? How can I add value? And then create a product out of it. So whether that's centralized leasing, whether that's secret shops, whether that's, funnel, there's a lot of different ways where I'm just always asking myself, okay, where's my broom? What needs to be swept? What needs to be cleaned so that we can add value and have a product to sell?
Man, I love that. That is so good. I'm going to tell my kids that tonight, Jason.
Yeah, there you go.
It's summertime, right? So the kids are always like, "I'm bored." Awesome. Grab a broom.
Clean something.
I like that. And I will say, just as a business leader, man, that is so true. The individuals that raise their hand and say, "Hey, I got done with this. Can I help with something else?" It shows their character, their integrity, their desire. And they're the ones that, often get what looks like a hard project, but often important projects of, "Hey, I haven't had time to get to this. Can you take this on?" That's great career advice.
And it's the essence of servant leadership, right? Being able to recognize when others are struggling and to take it on yourself.
I love that. And you mentioned kind of some of the ethos behind the centralized teams at Redstone, but maybe let's go back even before that. What were the problems? So you mentioned you made your way into student housing via your wife, right? And you kind of started at the community level. So I think, most folks recognize that historically, and I went to, Provo, BYU, down the road from UVU.
That's the blue one, right?
The blue one, yeah, not the green
Okay.
one. Definitely not the red one. But, most folks think of their apartment experience, even if they've moved on and bought a home, think back to student housing and that community experience like you talked about. And it is we use the word on-site in our industry, and it is, right? It's all there. And so it's not surprising that historically our industry has gravitated to doing the work on sites where the residents are, right? It's where the money is made. So I'm curious kind of what led to Redstone really was a pioneer, and you mentioned kind of this ethos of your personal ambition of, grabbing the broom, but were there certain problems that Redstone leadership saw that, could lead to centralization? And I ask that because a lot of the guests we've had on the show came from the world of REITs, and the REITs was there's no economies of scale. So looking at through a financial lens of there's got to be a better way to share the resources. I'm curious kind of what were some of the problems to be solved in the early days of centralization at Redstone?
Yeah, I think a lot of it stemmed from my experience, when I started on site, and I quickly recognized, and I had done a lot of hard things before, but being on site was the hardest job I have ever done or probably will ever do. It is demanding on every level, right? There's tons of different things competing for your time. People are upset with you. You try to help them. They become more upset with you. You have parents involved. You have lawyers involved. You have, there's, you know what I mean? Just it's a complicated mess, right? In higher ed, it's called in local parentis, right? We're acting in a lot of ways in place of a parent in this coming of age experience. And so, yeah, there's gonna be a lot of things that go on. And so one of the things that I realized is there's all of these things competing for our on-site team's attention and time, and there frankly isn't enough to go around. And so that was my first lens, is if I could take something off of their plate, would that allow them to give more to their greatest level of contribution, right? If I could identify the things that, again, going back to that ethos, if I could find some things to take off their plate, for example, leasing. Let's say I were to take leasing off the table for the on-site team and say, hey, I only want you to focus on the resident experience. I want you to know every single person's name. I want you to have birthday treats. I want you to leave notes on their car about how much you love them, whatever it may be, right? Like, I want the on-site team to really focus on building the best resident relationship ever. And renewals go up and our marketing costs go down. That's a huge lift. So that's the first thing. The second thing is our on-site teams, they work during the day and they're working hard during the day. But our leads, our students, are available at night when they're done working or when they're not in class. Their parents are available at night when they're not at work. And so we have three options. Option one is we ask our teams to work 16-hour days, to come in when the office opens and stay late until the night, so that way they can interact with their leads. Option two is they do everything that they've been doing previously. They continue to contact leads during the day and get a sub 25% response rate. Or we find a way to find another group of people who are willing to work at night, who prefer to work at night, and we can make them amazing leasers. And through tools such as Funnel, we can basically, through scale and scope, shrink the things that they're working on, right? So that's scope, and we can increase the amount of properties that they're working through scale. An example of this is, you text your leads for the day. A lot of it, the remainder time is waiting to be engaged, right? You're waiting for someone to respond to you. And if you're waiting for one person to respond, you might as well be waiting for two people to respond. And if you're waiting for two people, why not 6 people? Why not 12 people? Why not 20 people? And so we were able to really get as much value as we could from that waiting to be engaged time, simply because we were able to contact more leads and have people available to help. So that was a long-winded answer to that. Hopefully that was useful.
Extremely useful, yeah, and I think similar to me, there's a lot that you said that was there's a lot of depth into what you were saying, and I want to unpack some of those. You made some really good points. One, by the way, velocity I'm going to come back to in the leasing cycles, but I like the objective, take work off the sites, right? So that's clear, and you had that empathy of having the firsthand personal experience to know that was needed, and especially, like you said, through the lens of the emotion in student housing and these young adults. The second I like that you highlighted was this misalignment of renter behavior, consumer behavior, which is they're looking for apartments at odd hours, but we're staffing it during the day, right? And so you have wasted time. And that's certainly something I think every business is thinking about today is, can the combination of role specialization and AI help us eliminate time sitting on our hands saying, I hope somebody follows up with me, right?
Right.
So I think that's a huge shift. I want to just maybe for a second detour into kind of thinking about today, but again, a lot of our listeners are much more familiar with the world of multifamily. Leasing velocity. You highlighted that, leasing was an opportunity for centralization for you all, but I think back to my student housing days, which were much longer ago. And I was just thinking, Jason, neither you or I could go to the Blue School because we got beat.
I know. Yep.
I wouldn't be allowed back in right now. But the leasing cycles are very different in student housing. Maybe unpack that for us a little bit and how that was both maybe an opportunity and a challenge in centralization. Because again, normal multifamily leasing, there's some seasonality, right? The leasing season we talk about, but in your world, that's a real thing, right? That there's very specific dates that people have to be moving in and out of their house.
And that's exactly it. With student housing, there's a clear deadline of if you don't sell this unit by this deadline, you're not going to sell that unit. And so the pressure and the intensity that the on-site leasing teams feel to hit that deadline is enormous, because we know that a lot of these properties are investment properties. They're doing it to generate an income, a lot of times to disperse to grandma and grandpas, right? Just folks, normal folks who have their retirement set into this. And so if they're 90% full and they're not making any money, then that's a real issue. When it comes to leasing velocity, then absolutely every single day counts. And it starts, if move in, is mid August, let's say August 15th, then the next leasing cycle starts on August 16th, right? You hit it from the ground as soon as you can, whether that's generating that rapport to get renewals or working with prospects to get ready for the next year.
You've got these two different kind of really important dates that you just highlighted, or kind of motions. You've got the lease up, and the way I always thought about student housing versus traditional multifamilies is a more, you just described it, it's more like a cruise that's going to leave port into a perishable asset, to your point. And if you don't get people in, it's very unlikely you're going to make that up next month. There's some quarterly transfers. The other big data, of course, is that turn period, and I'm curious, as you think about that and the role of centralization. So there's leasing, which is more the front door, and then there's kind of the resident ongoing relationship, even the maintenance side of turning over units. What does that look like, moving people in, moving out in mass? And what role does centralization play, if any, for Redstone and kind of that more resident-centric, end of the leasing journey?
We speak reverently when we talk about turns, because it's one of those things where you just don't joke about. You just hug each other during that time, because it's intense. You've gone through this really busy leasing season. There's a lot of stress. And at the end of it, you need to move out hundreds and hundreds of residents to make way for a few days later, hundreds and hundreds of more residents. And what's special about this is it's not only residents, but like they're going to come have their mom and dad come and look at this unit. Most students, when they move in, they're like, okay, yeah, this is doable. Mom and dad, they expect the best for their little boy or little girl, right? Which Redstone, which we do, and we work really hard to make sure that all of our units live up to that. But there's a lot of pressure knowing that someone is trusting us with their child to come live with us, and that first impression means a lot. It is a logistical miracle, right? It takes so much planning, and there's so much hard work and so much training that's involved with it. Everything from, okay, when are the cleaners going to come? And then 2 hours after that, we're going to have the painters come. 30 minutes after that, we're going to, whatever it may be, we're going to have the carpet people come. Wow. And then you take into account that not all of the units will be completely empty, that maybe 2 people are moving out of the unit, but 2 people are still staying there. And so what is a lived-in unit look like versus what should a new resident expect when they move in? We have a lot of trackers and processes that we've created that our regional team goes over with our community managers weekly to verify that everyone's on track, to make sure we have the painters lined up, the cleaners, everyone is ready to go. As far as centralization and how that could help with the turns process, I think it goes back to that playing a support role. If you're walking units, making sure everything's correct, but let's say you're still at 95% and you've got folks still trying to lease, taking time away from your office is a pretty big deal, and it's almost a financial decision at that point. Right. And so being able to flip a switch to have folks remotely being able to help, even if they can't walk the units, but they can still help with the leasing effort, is a major win.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, talking about this, Jason, is giving me both great memories and some PTSD of trying to get. I didn't know how to clean an apartment, and I remember the amount of pressure that, hey, you got to do this. You're not getting your deposit back, and it was just hysteria on the streets of the colony in Provo when I had to move out.
Well, and then you think about the poor trashing and sanitation teams for the city, and just so much things that people, they're just like, I don't want to take this with me, and so they just kind of leave it for the dumpster. Yeah,
moving across the country, can't take it on the plane. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, are there, through trial and error, are there any roles that you think should not be centralized? I mean, obviously we just talked about there's a lot of boots on the ground work that needs to happen. You talk about the role that, I would imagine that student housing, go back to your point about the kind of this parental role that needs to be played by the student housing provider, that, we have some customers that have literally gone, no on-site team members anymore. And that there's a certain approach, there's a certain value in that, and they're optimizing for the digital experience. But I would imagine you need to have a leader on the ground for a lot of the interactions with these students, with their parents. And I'm curious then, what other roles don't make sense to move off, or which ones do, as you've experimented with this?
Yeah, I would. My brain is going in a lot of different directions. I think the first direction would be, we see enrollment in higher ed going up and down. What does the trend look like in the future? The value of a degree with the advent of AI, with so many different things, right? Like, what does higher ed look like in the next 20 years, 20 to 30 years? And I don't know, maybe enrollment will continue to go up, maybe it'll continue to drop. But what I will say is that historically, for most of modern human civilization, like there has always been a coming of age experience that young adults crave to help them transition from childhood to adulthood, right? For most, that's higher education. It could be the military, it could be a mission, it could be employment or something like that. But having a centralized place for young adults to come together and have that experience and learn and grow together in a somewhat controlled environment is a huge lift. An example of this too is during COVID, we were actually really nervous. Like everyone's going to want to go home and they're going to want out of their contracts. You know what I mean? What are we going to do during COVID? And it turned out there were actually more people who were like, hey, I cannot stay at home anymore. They're driving me crazy. That we had people who had that internal desire to still live in student housing, even if they weren't going to school, simply for that coming of age experience. So that's my first thought is just making sure in student housing, we don't necessarily see it as student housing. We see it as a transitional period that most people want to go through, regardless of what they're doing academically. So the next question is, okay, well, what supports need to be in place for these young adults to transition? And I don't know what the answer is, but I know what the wrong answer is. The wrong answer is we don't leave them alone, right? You don't give them a $20 million asset and you say, hey, please wipe your shoes every time you enter the clubhouse, because it just wouldn't work. They're still learning, they're still growing, and that sense of accountability for a lot of them, responsibility, just hasn't set in yet. And so you do need some structure in the form of a community manager to be that shepherd and help them to make the right choices. So I don't ever see that community manager in student housing going away, simply because they play an important role in helping folks transition. And honestly, with Redstone, we've seen our most successful student managers almost don't even act as a community manager. They act more as a favorite aunt, right, or uncle that has the relationship to call them out when they're not behaving the right way, but because the love is there and because that support is there, it's interpreted really well. So I don't ever see the community manager, something like that, being centralized. I think the other thing too is, Redstone Connect, we do a great job at reaching out and helping people at night, doing our after-hour leasing. But it doesn't replace a tour. And a lot of times when our students are going on these tours, the leasing agent who gives them a tour of the property is the living logo of the property. They're a reflection not just of the property, but who these students can be after living in that property, right? And so I don't think we would ever want to take that away, because our potential to make an impact would decrease, right? So Tyler, you're 18, you step foot on a property, the person giving you a tour guide, let's say it's someone that you can relate with, you're probably going to choose where you live based on who you want to become after living there, based on that tour guide. So I don't ever see that going away. As far as centralization goes, really our job is to pave the path so that procrastination doesn't creep in, so that analysis paralysis doesn't sit in, to really help people accomplish their goals. But we know if we let them wait, then most likely they're just not going to make any progress by themselves. And then the other thing I think we could centralize, that we're going to start centralizing, is after our emergency lines. The amount of, poor college kids who lock themselves out at 2 a.m., it would blow your mind. And so being able to tell mom and dad, hey, we will always be available for your kid to get back in. They don't have to sleep in the garage. There's a small fee that comes along with it, and then to be able to tell the client, hey, there's never going to be a flood or a fire or something like that that's going to destroy your asset. Like, we'll always have someone available. Through centralization helps.
That's awesome. Yeah, it doesn't blow my mind. I definitely spent at least one night sleeping on the lawn.
Oh, no.
Losing the keys. I love, Jason, how you speak about your team and about your clients, your students, and there's a huge degree of empathy I hear in your voice for this, like you said, this coming of age experience. And I'm curious, you referenced obviously kind of talking about the future of student housing and what role does AI play in higher ed. I'm curious, you talk about Redwood Connect, and obviously you're handling high volumes of communication. So we've talked about this kind of, hey, you could be working multiple leads at once. We're going to specialize that role. I'm curious where you've seen AI play a role in assisting those ambitions, assisting renters in that journey, and how you marry that with what clearly is coming across, which is a high degree of empathy and human touch, which I think I had this thought this weekend that I was thinking, if I were to start a management company right now, I would be over-indexing on the human touch because
Yeah.
everyone's sprinting to what can I automate away, which certainly Funnel wants to play a role in. But I think that hearing leaders like yourself talk about the ways in which you build rapport and trust and empathy with your customer pays dividends. We know that. So anyway, yeah, talk to me about kind of that balancing act of where to leverage AI, especially high volumes of communication that you're seeing in your, what others would consider contact center, right? This CLO. Versus where to use AI, where do you not?
Yeah, and what's interesting too is, maybe our parents' generation, the AI can fool them pretty easily. We're getting to a generation where they can sense it pretty quick. I'm seeing a lot of fun things on Instagram and Facebook where people will post, their love, like their boyfriend or girlfriend sends them this really lovey-dovey message, but there's like a hyphen in it, and they're just like, nope, you're dead to me. That was ChatGPT. You don't care about me. And it's just a matter of time before these young adults, they're able to sense the AI. And I found this recruiting, Tyler. When I would recruit at high schools, I would say the same spiel over and over again, that it was so perfect that people would reject it, right? They wouldn't pay attention. I had to strategically place ums and grammatical mistakes into my presentations, into my assemblies, because guess what? Just kidding. They would ignore it. It didn't come off as genuine. And so there was this really fascinating thing that we could connect almost more with the imperfections. And that doesn't mean we don't put our best foot forward. But what that does mean is that, authenticity is going to mean a lot more in the sales process, in the connection process than maybe we anticipated. And so, even though we don't ever want to send out messages that have spelling errors or that have too many emojis or things like that, we do have to keep in mind that there's going to be some desensitization. What is it? Desensitizing, yeah, to the AI, where they're just not going to notice or they're just not going to care. So that's one lens to look at it is, what the generation that we're going to be marketing to, what are their attitudes towards AI? The second thing that I think is really interesting is, you think about AI and Skynet and evil robots and all of these things, and how do we keep it from coming? And really, for me, the answer is you have to pair it with human capacity, right? It's not a robot that can go rogue on its own. It's a robot that's paired with a human so that the human can make the moral and ethical decisions on how to proceed, right? Because my hope as a human being is that collectively, all of us as humanity would ultimately make the right decision, right? There's enough good people. I think there's more good people in the world than bad people in the world. So, if we were to basically have AI give it to humans, then we should be okay. Maybe I'm naive in thinking that. And so my perspective when it comes to, multifamily and student housing is AI, it should be used to elevate the human, the leasing agent's capacity, whether that's sorting through messages, whether that's, having in Gmail when you're writing and it says, hey, this is what I think you want to say. Do you want to edit it? Things like that. Your workflows and funnel have been really helpful in just basically taking all the chaos that is on site, getting rid of the sticky notes and saying, hey, these are the things that you need to do today in order to align with your priorities. Yeah, what are some other things that could potentially happen? I think there's a lot of reporting that a lot of folks are doing by hand previously that can be automated for quick access for decision makers. Yeah, so ultimately just making it easier for the humans to do their greatest level of contribution.
I love that. Yeah, and I think, again, the clear connection you all have in your culture, I think, is going to lead to the right humans making the right decisions. And I think, like you said, I couldn't agree more, empowering the humans to do better work. Now, the theme of AI obviously points to the future, and we don't have a crystal ball in the future. You referenced earlier that, in the future for your vision of centralization is adding more value, both, and I like how you framed it. You framed it both adding value to, you have a lot of clients you need to manage for. You've got the client, the renter, the student on property. You've got their parents who are most likely paying the rent. And then you have, your clients, right, that are actually making sure their asset is cared for.
Yeah.
And so you gave an example of, hey, in the future, we're going to do, lockout services, right, and making sure that there's somebody available to go visit the property 24/7. Are there other use cases that you all are contemplating for, whether it's AI like we just talked about, or centralization, where you think there may be more opportunities than what you're already doing today?
So yeah, right now we're doing after-hour leasing, which seems to be a really impactful practice. Next step is to launch our after-hour emergency line. Really something. So we'll have these locals, college students who are there to answer the phone, really just to de-escalate and be like, oh Tyler, oh my goodness, you got locked out. Okay, I'm going to take care of this right now. Don't stress, right? Other times someone may call and they'll be upset that their refrigerator light bulb is out. We don't want to bother the CM. We don't want to ruin their night with an unnecessary call. So we can essentially de-escalate and say, Tyler, we realize that this is so important to you. First thing tomorrow, we're going to leave a note for the community manager or maintenance manager to reach out to you, or at least acknowledge that you have this concern. So that's the second thing. I think call overflows will be a big deal. Being on site, especially if you're a small site, you can be pulled in a lot of different directions, and you're placed in these situations where without something like centralization, it's really hard to win. Let's say you have a hot lead that just came in, a parent who's on the phone who's upset, right? And a resident who, just walked in because they have a roommate issue. Like, which one takes priority? Is it the leasing because we have to hit occupancy in order for this whole thing to work? Is it the parent who's upset right now and wants a resolution? You can't really say, sorry, ma'am, I got to make another phone call. Or do you deal with the person who's right in front of you with the relationships? And so, one of the things that I'd love to see is a call overflow where someone calls in, the on-site has, X amount of rings to answer it. And if not, it goes to an overflow. 90% of what the prospect or the resident needs handled, we could probably do it remotely, whether that's checking a balance. Worst case scenario, leaving a task on funnel, a custom task for the property to do. So that's something I could see us really getting into. Secret shops have been fun for us, the analytics and assessment of our own teams. And I know with Phoenix, you guys are launching that. Yeah. And then a couple other just crazy projects.
It all fell under the umbrella of trying to take work off the teams and elevating them. So staying on consistent themes there. Well, Jason, this has been fascinating, and we could go on for hours. But before we wrap up, so that the audience can get to know you a little better, I wanted to ask a couple of questions, about your career trajectory and just about you personally.
Please.
So you mentioned earlier, about kind of the career advice or the lesson you learned about, sweeping the floor, specifically to somebody kind of early in their career in student housing. Is there anything that you might highlight for them specific to this industry that you would say, hey, I wish I would have understood this piece earlier? You've given a lot of great advice along the way, but anything else that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think as you get into it, in student housing, again, playing that parent but not parent role, it's easy to almost be seen as an adversary in student housing, right? Like, what do you mean I can't have this party till 3 a.m.? What do you mean I have to pay to get this window fixed? And so just remember, just making sure they remember that if we truly see it as that coming of age experience, if you truly see it as you may be the one person in their life that cares about them in this moment that they feel comfortable talking to. In student housing, don't necessarily see it as an investment property, see it as an opportunity to change lives. And then even when things get hard, even when people are upset, look at it from that lens, and it'll make everything a lot easier, and the relationships will just make it a lot more fulfilling and purpose-driven.
Love that, Jason. Yeah, and I think that again, they keep using the word, but the level of empathy that you're discussing, I would imagine that student housing attracts people that similarly are passionate about that phase in life and helping. And I've got 2 teenage daughters that are in high school now, and so I'm starting to already think about student housing. And I would hope that they get to engage with people that don't just view them as a resident, right, or a lease, that they view them as a human that is imperfect but is growing. So that's awesome. All right, well, let's just fire a couple of quick questions here to get to know you better. So we like to ask people, just to kind of an opinion you feel strongly about. We've got this billboard outside the funnel office here. And this could be, student housing related, multifamily, technology, or just, use your blinker. But, whatever opinion you have.
Wear sunscreen.
What do you want us to put on this? What do you want us to put on this billboard?
So one of the things I've learned is, the thing that really separates those who seem to always be succeeding in life versus those who are always struggling, in my experience, is they have the capacity to see big things as big and small things as small, right? Two things can be true, but not equally important. And so the one thing I feel really strongly about is trying to discover, what is the big thing and what are the small things? Because if you can have that, then that perspective will help you make the right decisions.
I love that. Yeah, I'm reading a great book right now about Winston Churchill, and he did very good that he addressed the realities of, hey, we're getting attacked, but in the long run, we're going to be okay. Here's all the reasons for optimism. I love that perspective. All right. Well, if you, Jason, had the opportunity, again, it sounds like you're one of the fortunate people that have found a calling in life and a passion, and you get to work in that. But if you were to retire tomorrow and work on a philanthropic cause, what's something near and dear to your heart?
Yeah, I would say something with adult education, kind of higher ed related. I think higher ed has kind of gone off track of what it was originally designed to do. I think it's become a little bit formulaic and a little more, online quiz type focus. So I would love to see a renaissance of education, whether that's through higher ed or some other source, to help folks just kind of capture the love that I think has been beaten out of people with learning and education, because I feel like it's gotten a little too stuffy, a little too structured.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think I'm grateful that that's an opinion that seems to be resonating more and more. So I think there will be opportunities to rethink that, but it's a great cause. All right, well, at Funnel we have the tagline, which is renter centric. What does that mean to you or to Redstone when you think of that concept?
I think renter centric is just making sure that the people that we're serving, that you put them first, that if our residents and our prospects are having a great experience, if everything that we're doing is meant to elevate that, then everything else downstream will work. I can't remember the quote, right, where he says, if you take care of your customers, they'll take care of you. And I think of renter centric is, instead of trying to sell, try to understand, and then once you understand, you know how to help.
Yeah, I like that. Put the first things first.
Yeah.
Beautiful. We talk about with a lot of our guests the future of multifamily. I do think student housing has a unique lens into, you get to work with literally the renters of tomorrow, right? These are, consumers who are renting their first home. For you, if you were to finish this sentence thinking broadly about multifamily housing, rental housing maybe writ large, the future of multifamily housing is what?
I'm going to say dynamic. I think the days of having a barbecue area and calling it good are long gone. I think you're going to need apartments that are built around dogs. I think you're going to need apartments that are built around technology, gaming. I think it'll be the competition for residents is going to be so intense that the old school ways of just building a gazebo and calling it good are long gone. You have to find a way to connect with people's interests. And then I think the other thing is community, especially for young men. We're seeing this a ton in Gen Z, that they're just more disconnected. The properties that are able to solve that connection issue are going to be the properties that fill up.
Yeah, that was maybe the best answer, Jason, we've ever got on the podcast for the future. I couldn't agree more. The dynamic, and not only the asset itself, the way you service your customers, the needs of those renters. That was fantastic. All right, well, last question for you. Is there a value or principle that for you or for Redstone you refuse to compromise on?
Yeah, so for us, it would be just honesty. It doesn't matter what it is, how painful it is, that you just have to be honest. The second we're dishonest or we compromise, we disconnect ourselves from viewing reality as it really is, right? You lie to others, eventually begin lying to yourself, and eventually become blind to what's happening. And so best protection, I guess, best crystal ball moment is just trying to align yourself as closely as you can with the truth and what's right. And as you do that, then you can see things clearly. You can see big things as big and small things as small, which will help you solve all the big problems.
Wonderful, Jason. Well, this has been a lot of fun. If folks want to learn more about you or about your company, where should they follow along? LinkedIn, Instagram? I mean, you guys are probably on TikTok because you're
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have a podcast, a Redstone podcast, that I can get you the link to. I'm on LinkedIn, and then we're pretty active as a company on LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. We'll include that in the show notes. But Jason, thank you for your time. This has been a lot of fun, and we'll talk soon.
All right, great. It was great seeing you.
Thanks, Jason.
All right, take care.